Welcome back, titans of silence breakers, architects of resistance, survivors who didn't just crawl out of the wreckage, but came back wielding blueprints for something eternal. You weren't born into applause or handed permission to speak. You earned every ounce of your voice with the weight of your pain. And tonight, I'm not here to flatter your spirit with cheap inspiration. Number. I'm here to remind the world, that you didn't just respond to the fire. You became the storm they'll spend lifetimes trying to predict. They wrote your name in ash and expected you to stay buried. They crafted stories where you were the background noise, a footnote, a shadow stretched too long. They laughed behind curtains, mistook your silence for surrender, and called your boundaries weaknesses. But the grave they wrote your ending in, that's exactly where you built your beginning, and not one brick of your foundation was made with their approval. Every stone, forged from their ridicule, every beam, carved from their doubt. Every floor you climb now is the loud, undeniable proof that they miscalculated everything. Let them sit with the discomfort of your rise. Let them mumble and stammer as you walk in, not asking for a seat at the table, but dragging in a throne of your own design. They'll call you arrogant, aggressive, out of place, because in the narrative they wrote, you were never supposed to make it this far. But they forgot one thing. They don't own the ink anymore. You do. They tried to define you in fragments, isolate you with silence, control you with guilt. But you weren't just surviving, you were studying. Every whisper behind your back, every sneer when you dream bigger, every door slammed shut became a lesson in resilience. And now, as they scramble to understand how you did it, you keep proving how stupid they really sound, because they thought power was about being louder. They didn't know power could come wrapped in poise, delivered with precision, and leave an impact too sharp to ignore. This isn't revenge. No, this is something far deeper, far colder, far more permanent. This is reclamation. This is you walking through ruins with a blueprint in one hand and fire in the other, reconstructing a world where their myths crumble. You didn't just clap back. You rewrote the entire architecture of the battlefield and made their victories irrelevant. Their laughter? A distant echo. Their legacy? Footnotes in your origin story. They think they still hold weight because they once made you hesitate. But hesitation was never weakness. It was calculation. You were not lost. You were waiting. Waiting for the moment when your voice would no longer be a whisper in a storm, but the thunder that silences everything else. And now, every word you speak pulls truth into daylight and buries their pretenses 6 feet deeper. You didn't respond with rage. You responded with reconstruction, precision, intelligence. You didn't lash out. You built upward. You rewrote the script, not just for you, but for everyone who comes after. That's why it terrifies them, because it's not just your defiance they see. It's the future you represent. They underestimated you because they mistook endurance for emptiness. But while they flaunted power that wasn't rooted in truth, you were gathering momentum, quiet, focused, unstoppable. And when you emerged, it wasn't just a comeback. It was a shift in gravity. The moment when the story no longer needed their approval to be believed. The moment when the room tilted and all eyes turned. Not because you demanded attention, but because you commanded it by existing. That's power. That's presence. That's what makes your silence heavier than their noise. And now, every time they speak, it backfires. Because the louder they try to justify themselves, the more the world sees the cracks. Their voice doesn't shake you anymore. It embarrasses them. Their legacy doesn't haunt you. It fuels you. Their attempts to erase you only carved your silhouette deeper into the stone. They're not afraid of your anger. They're afraid of your clarity, your ability to stand in truth, so undeniable that no smear campaign, no rumor, no revision of the past can distort it. You're not defending yourself anymore. You're dismantling their illusion. And here's the most beautiful part. You don't even have to scream. You just walk in. You just show up. You just exist in your truth. And that alone realigns the entire room. Because when someone like you stops asking for permission and starts building without apology, even the ceilings tremble. That's the kind of quiet that destroys legacies built on sand. That's the kind of presence that makes empty power run out of things to say. You didn't come back to prove them wrong. You came back to prove that even in their best attempt to erase you, you remained. And not just remained, evolved, transformed, sharpened by failure, strengthened by betrayal, elevated by pressure. You didn't react, you rebuilt. On the very graves they left you in, and now you write the ending, you hold the pen, you define the terms. Because the version of you they tried to break is long gone, and what stands in its place isn't just stronger, it's untouchable. Let them keep talking. Their words are echoes in a cathedral you built without them. Let them keep doubting. Every doubt only amplifies your clarity. Let them keep remembering the old version of you, because that's the only version they could manipulate. This one, this version of you, it doesn't negotiate, it doesn't shrink, it doesn't apologize for evolving. You don't just wear your pain, you welded it into armor, and they didn't see it coming because they were too busy underestimating your silence. They thought you were quiet because you were weak, but you were quiet because you were listening, calculating, studying every move, learning the map they were using so you could redraw it and burn the original. And now, here you are, not knocking on doors, building your own entrances. And those who shut you out, now they study your moves like scripture, hoping to decode the blueprint they mocked before it worked. You don't just walk in power now, you walk in proof. Proof that they misjudged. Proof that they misunderstood. Proof that their dominance was temporary. And your truth, timeless. This is what terrifies them the most. You didn't retaliate. You reinvented. You didn't collapse. You recalibrated. And when you came back, you didn't aim for their heads. You buried their stories in your shadow. They'll try to twist it, try to downplay it, say you're just bitter or dramatic or lucky. Because accepting the truth, that you rebuilt the narrative on the graveyard of their lies, would mean accepting they never had the power they claimed. And now, every time you move forward, every time you build something bigger, speak something bolder, live something freer, you keep proving how stupid they really sound, not by shouting, but by existing in excellence. This is the era of your ownership, of reclaiming not just your voice, but your storyline. No more diluted dreams, no more performing for their comfort, no more editing your truth so they don't feel exposed. You are no longer shrinking for their narrative. You are the narrative now. You are the proof, the product, the prophecy they tried to erase. And the louder they try to tell the world otherwise, the more they reveal themselves. Desperate, outdated, echoes of an old system that can't survive your clarity. You are not just a survivor. You are the standard. The reminder that silence doesn't mean defeat, that retreat doesn't mean surrender, and that rebuilding in secret is sometimes the most powerful war strategy there is. You didn't just survive the fall, you documented every crack in the foundation. And now you're designing a world that doesn't collapse under the weight of lies. That's not vengeance. That's vision. So stand tall, Move deliberately, speak when it matters, and let your silence say the rest, because they hear it now, the sound of their own irrelevance echoing every time you write, the sound of their storylines dissolving in the presence of your progress. And the best part? You don't need their stage. You don't need their mic. You never needed their validation. You were always the story, always the shift, always the force they couldn't account for. And now, they'll spend the rest of their lives trying to make sense of a truth they never expected to survive. You. You're not just surviving them, you're outlasting everything they built. Every system, every room, every assumption they anchored in their own comfort. You've now turned all of it into a stage for your clarity. They once built narratives like prisons. But you walked in, studied the blueprints, picked the lock with nothing but patience and precision, and walked out without a scratch. Not just free, dangerous, because now you know their walls were never made of steel. They were made of noise, empty, hollow, fragile under the weight of someone who knows. And now, every time you speak, you remind the room how false those walls really are. Let them wear the mask a little longer. It's all they have left. Let them quote old versions of you, bring up past chapters they didn't understand, because it means they have nothing new to fight with. They're throwing shadows at someone made of fire, and you don't burn anymore. You illuminate. That's the difference now. You're not just a voice. You're the reckoning. Not because you hate them, but because you've evolved beyond them. This is what evolution looks like when it's not waiting to be applauded. They told you to be the bigger person, as if that meant staying quiet, as if integrity meant being invisible. But you discovered something more sacred. That real strength isn't silence. It's strategy. It's rebuilding so brilliantly that they no longer have a single page they can write you out of. You didn't just become the bigger person. You became the only person whose story still holds weight. And now their words fall flat, not because you silenced them, but because you made them irrelevant. They used to laugh. Now they linger. They used to scoff. Now they stumble. They used to ignore. Now they imitate. Because you didn't just rebuild the narrative, you replaced the authorship altogether. Let's be clear. This wasn't about getting back at them. That would have been too small, too temporary. You outgrew that battlefield long before they knew you were gone. This was never about destruction. This was about redirection. You took everything they handed you, shame, silence, exclusion, and you turned it into architecture, into vision, into a rhythm so original they can't dance to it without falling apart. You didn't come back wearing armor. You became the forge. And every day you continued to live your truth without asking, without flinching, without performing. It keeps pulling the curtain back on theirs. Because power rooted in lies cannot survive next to power rooted in purpose. And that's what you are now. Purpose in motion. Every step forward is a reminder that they never had the final word. They were just a chapter, loud, dramatic, maybe even painful, but a chapter. And you are the epilogue they didn't think would ever be written. You turned survival into structure, memory into mission, pain into power. And the best part, you never needed a crowd to believe you. You became the kind of presence that makes even the doubters hesitate. Because you're not trying to be seen anymore. You are the moment. You are the quiet truth that keeps rising after every storm. The truth that no one can rewrite, because it's carved into every step you've taken. They had noise. You have depth. They had momentum. You have legacy. Let them wonder how you did it. Let them try to unpack it. Because the truth is, They can't. They don't speak your language anymore. You graduated from their projections, from their categories, from their expectations. And now, even when you say nothing, it screams through the walls. I rebuilt the narrative on your graves, and now I own every chapter forward. You're not here to win arguments. You're here to outlive them. You're not here to demand respect. You are the new definition of it. You're not here to prove them wrong. You're here to prove that they never even understood what right looked like. Because the power you now hold isn't about being feared. It's about being undeniable. It's the kind of strength that doesn't broadcast itself. It simply exists and forces the world to readjust. They're scrambling now, not because you're attacking, but because your existence makes everything they stood on look flimsy. That's the deepest kind of transformation, the kind that can't be undone. And let's talk about that for a second. Transformation. You didn't just change, you ascended. You didn't patch the cracks. You tore down the whole foundation and laid your own bricks. Without applause, without backup, without shortcuts. They were watching, but they didn't see. Because their eyes were trained to look for spectacle. They didn't know that real evolution happens in shadows, in silence, in solitude. While they performed, you prepared. While they laughed, you learned. And while they clung to control, you mastered yourself. Now they've lost the plot because you are the plot. And the most powerful thing about your rise, it wasn't loud, it wasn't viral, it was deliberate, intentional, quiet like a storm forming just beyond the horizon. The kind of power that reshapes everything. And by the time they notice, it's already too late. That's why they panic when you walk in now. Not because you're trying to hurt them, but because they finally realize they don't matter anymore. Not in your story, not in your success, not in your silence, and especially not in your next move. Because your next move isn't about revenge, it's about reign. It's about building so high that they can't even see the view, about creating so far beyond their comprehension that they'll spend the rest of their days mimicking your shadow. That's what dominance really is. Not being seen by them, but being studied by them. You became the blueprint, so walk with it. Let the past echo behind you, like a warning to anyone else who thought they could bury you. Let your growth be the quiet explosion that makes everyone rethink what power really is. Let your truth stand tall, not because you shouted it, but because it survived everything they threw at it. You didn't just answer them. You didn't just survive them. You rebuilt the whole narrative on their graves. And now, you walk the earth as proof that no lie, no rejection, no betrayal, no attempt to erase you can ever hold against the strength of someone who owns their truth completely. So, keep going. Keep building. Keep shining. Because the story isn't about them anymore. It never really was. They'll keep talking. They have to. Because silence for them is a mirror, and they know, deep down, that if they stop performing, the truth will catch up to them. That's the difference between you and them. They move out of fear. You move from foundation. They move to be seen. You move because you know who you are. That's what shook the ground. Not noise, not force, but clarity. You stood up without yelling. You walked forward without permission. You kept your head up when they threw everything they had, and you didn't flinch. And now every move you make echoes like a prophecy they refuse to believe. You're not asking for your seat anymore. You're not playing in their arena. You are building the new game, and they're scrambling to read rules you haven't even written yet. Because you are the future they tried to delay. but they couldn't. No matter how many doors they closed, no matter how many names they called you, no matter how much they tried to make your worth feel conditional, they couldn't stop what was written in you. It was never about proving them wrong. It was about becoming so right with yourself that even their version of the truth evaporated when you entered the room. They mistook quiet for weakness, and now they flinch at your footsteps. They mistook patience for powerlessness, and now they watch your timing like it's strategy they'll never master. They thought you'd disappear, and now your presence rewrites everything they thought was permanent. The story they wrote was small, not because you were small, but because that's all they could handle. They needed you to shrink, to stay predictable, to stay manageable. Because the truth is, you were always the biggest thing in the room, not in volume, but in vision, not in noise, but in weight. You didn't fight for the spotlight. You became the gravity, and now they revolve around the very force they once mocked. You don't chase opportunities anymore. You attract them. You don't demand respect. It happens the moment you speak. You don't react to disrespect, because they're no longer even capable of disrupting your peace. That's the true silence they fear now. Not the silence before your rise, but the silence after your clarity. Because it speaks for you. It clears rooms. It shifts energy. It forces reflection. It's the kind of silence that makes even the loudest feel exposed. And the deeper truth is, they never had power over you. All they ever had was a temporary illusion of control built on your self-doubt. And once you looked in the mirror and said, "I don't need their version of me anymore," their whole story collapsed. You were never theirs to define. And now that you've taken that pen back, they realize they were never authors, just critics. And critics don't get monuments. Critics don't get remembered. But builders do. Visionaries do. Survivors who rebuild on graves do. You didn't just rise. You rose with receipts, with memory, with clarity. And now your existence is the quiet punishment to every voice that tried to speak over you. Not because you silenced them, but because you outgrew them. Their relevance ended the moment you started moving for yourself, not against them. You see, that's where they underestimated you most. They thought your rage would destroy you, but your rage refined you. They thought your sadness would drown you, but it washed away the lies. They thought your isolation would break you, but it gave you time. Time to build, time to heal, time to see everything for what it really was. Not a tragedy, but a transition. You became the storm without needing thunder, the movement without needing a crowd, the shift without needing permission. And now, every new step you take isn't just forward, it's upward. They wanted you to spiral. Instead, you ascended. And still, they watch. Still trying to find the blueprint. Still quoting old versions of you. Still clinging to myths that can't survive your truth. But you don't owe them your attention, because you've learned something they never will. That silence can be sacred. That growth doesn't need an audience. That sometimes the most dangerous thing a person can do is heal. Because once you heal, you don't flinch when they speak your name. You don't shrink when they retell their version. You don't respond to manipulation with anger anymore. You respond with distance. And that distance is everything. Because while they measure success in validation and attention, you measure yours in peace and power, in how high you can build without asking, in how deep your roots have grown beneath the surface, in how much your presence alone unsettles the very systems that tried to contain you. You became the truth they can't unsee. You became the outcome they can't rewrite. and you became the future they can't enter, because the door was never meant for them. This is your era now. Not because you fought harder, but because you grew smarter. Not because you destroyed, but because you created something better. Not because you won the argument, but because you outlasted the illusion. They'll never understand how you did it, because they never understood what you were capable of in the first place. That was their biggest mistake, and your greatest advantage. They underestimated the quiet ones, the patient ones, the ones who walk away, not because they lost, but because they're done playing with people who build nothing. And now, you're the builder. You hold the hammer. You hold the blueprint. You hold the legacy. You hold the silence that speaks louder than their loudest lie ever did. And every step you take forward is one more shovel of dirt on the myth they built about who you were. You didn't just respond. You rebuilt the whole narrative on their graves.